So we're going to be looking at contentment. One of those topics that maybe a lot of us we don't think about oftentimes. But I'll raise the issue. Are you content? Well, one guy I heard about, they was two old friends meeting on the street. A guy shows up, and he looks at his friend, and his friend is almost in tears, and he goes, "What's the matter?" He says, "Somebody dying? You got cancer?" He says, "No." He said, "Last week my uncle died, and he left me $40,000. "Well, why are you crying? That's great." He goes, "Well, you see, 2 weeks ago, a cousin I never knew, he died, and he left me $85,000. He says, "Well, that's unbelievable." He says, "Sounds to me like you've been really blessed." He says, "Well, you don't understand. The week before that, my great aunt passed, and I received $250,000. So why are you so sad?" "Well, this week, nothing." Yeah. Well, isn't that the case with us oftentimes? We're not content. We have so much. The other day I was thinking about this and doing some research actually. We are one of the richest nations in the entire world. Even if you think you're poor, you're rich. Especially if you consider that the average wage for the non-Western world is $3 a day. How much you spend on your coffee per day? We don't know what it is to be poor. We are not content, and honestly, most of the time, we have no reason for that. There was a man who took his very wealthy family, and they took a trip, and he wanted to take them to the poor cousins that lived out in the country on a little farm and way out in the middle of nowhere. And they spent a couple days and nights on the farm, and just so that the son and the kids could figure out, how well off they were and how poor their country cousins really were. And so what they were done, the dad asked, he says, "Well, what did you think of the trip?" And he says, "It was great, Dad." He said, "Did you see how poor people live?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah," said the son. He says, "Well, so tell me, what'd you learn?" He says, "Well, I saw that we have one dog, and they had 4. We have a pool that reaches to the middle of our garden, and they have a creek that has no end. We've imported lanterns into our garden, and they have stars at night. I didn't know what those were. Our patio reaches to the front yard, and they have the whole horizon. We have a small piece of land to live on, and they have fields that go on forever and ever. We have servants who serve us, but they serve others. We buy our food, but they grow theirs. We have walls all around our property to protect us, and they have friends to protect them." The boy's father was kind of speechless, and then his son said, "Dad, thanks for showing how poor we are." It's all a matter of perspective, isn't it? It really is. What is contentment? What makes us content? So we're going to look at that. And first of all, I just want to look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13. And Paul says this. He says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content whatever in any and every circumstance, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. His idea of contentment, what does it apply to? Well, there's all sorts of things, isn't it? And we'll talk about this. There's godly contentment. There's contentment with what you have. There's contentment with what place you are in life, where you are, so to speak, right? But being content is something that oftentimes it seems like we struggle with. Maybe you don't struggle. I'll give you a real good example that's happening right this moment for me. We have some property, that is, the family has property on the West Side Road. I have probably 50,000 board feet of wood that has been down, that is timber, that has been down for about 5 years. I've been trying to get it moved to my house or to get it milled for the last 4 years. For the last year, I've had this guy reserved to come in and do it, and he's not been able to. And then I find out last night, I'm thinking maybe I'll get 4 or 5 truckloads of timber. I get 1. Talk about being discontent. Until this morning, my brother-in-law calls and he says, you realize one load has about 16 cords in it. Okay, that adds some perspective, doesn't it? Now, okay, that may not sound like much to you, but that's how we heat our house. And my thought is plan ahead, get enough in there that I have 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of wood, so I don't have to worry about it, and I have to call Paul to deliver wood all the time. Yeah, he doesn't want me there. Well, of course, he'd love it, but the thing is that oftentimes, we're not very grateful. We're not very thankful. It says, I've learned the secret of being content. If you're not content with what you've got, there's all probability that you will not be thankful for what you get. If you're not thankful now, in all probability, you're not going to be thankful for what you get. Contentment and peace are really found in a grateful heart, isn't it? If you're grateful, it's easy to be content. Now, does that mean that you like everything going on around you? No, that doesn't mean that. It means we're content with where we are, what position God has put us in. Contentment is the ability to accept life as it is, not wanting anything more or different. You know, oftentimes we fight against our circumstances, and who becomes the miserable one? We do, because we're fighting against what God is already doing. Because we don't see his purposes for our lives. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, most of us don't even believe that he has a purpose for our lives. Or many of us, maybe. If we believe he has a purpose, we have to believe he's working through this. Janice's mom, it's been a struggle. It has. I would be lying if I didn't say that. Is there a purpose in it? Yeah, there is. For her and for us, as to what we're supposed to be learning. Are we content? You know what? Yes. Is she content? Well, I think she wants something different, and that is to be with Jesus. But yes, is she content? He's working out his perfect plan in our lives through the things that happen with us and through us and to us. And therefore, he wants us to be content. Submission and trust are really essential for those, aren't they? We've got to be submitted to the Lord and trust him in order for there to be contentment in that. So, but by the way, contentment does not mean that we can't desire for something or wish for a change. You got that? Doesn't mean that we don't want it to be different. I mean, honestly, I'm ready for Janice's mom to meet the Lord. She's ready. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying I want her out of the house. I don't mean it that way. What I mean is, I know that she's struggling. I see how it affects my wife, and it is a struggle. So there's that desire, forgive me, I mean, you can easily judge me on this, that I just want her to die. It's not that. I mean, I always used to joke that my mother-in-law, jokes about mother-in-laws, in her case, never stuck. Because they didn't. They don't stick to her. She's just so nice. She's so sweet. But she's ready. So, you know, if God's in that, he'll let her go. Ultimately, though, the source of our contentment ends up being Jesus. If he's the one who died for us, has given us everything, we're in the position that we're at, where does our contentment come from? From him. Only from him. I know that any of us can come up with something that we want to change. Maybe it's we want a new car. We want a new house. We want new cupboards. We want new kitchen. I don't know what it is. You know what it is. Things that we're not content with. We don't like where we live, so we're going to move somewhere else, thinking that grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Oftentimes, is it? No, not at all. And so those of you who are wanting to move, Bill and Carol, be content in whatever state you are in. And by the way, it says state. That means Oregon. Doesn't mean Texas. Okay, I'm just saying, I know they're going to move anyway, but you hear what I'm saying? No, we need to learn to be content. Accept what God has given us. See what he's doing in that. So let me read just a few verses that give you some context here, okay? Luke 3:14. John the Baptist had a meeting. He was out by the river preaching, and this is what it says. Some soldiers were questioning him and said, "And what about us? What shall we do?" And he said to them, "Do not take money from anyone by force or accuse anyone falsely. be content with your wages. Does that apply to us? Oh boy. How often it does, really? Are we content? Well, we could always use a little bit more, right? How come nobody ever says, well, I could do with less? Have you ever heard anybody say that? No, they always want more. One of my farm friends out there, he says, nature hates a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum, we want to fill it, and that means more. And it can be more of anything, right? Need to be content and with our wages. So then Jesus follows up in a different place in chapter 12, verse 15. He says, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions or their possessions. The idea, though, again, is be content. What you have, okay. Think we need a new gun, a new car, a new wife, a new whatever, new kids, right? Could be any of that. Be content. Let God be in charge. Let him work in your life. Let him, as a matter of fact, Romans 8:28, for God works together for good, all things, right? For those who believe. If we're trusting in him, if we have that, we can trust him in that. Paul continues on in another passage, 1 Timothy 6:6 through 6:8 actually. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. What is he saying really? Don't worry about all this stuff. In another place he talks about the birds of the air, and God takes care of those, right? Are they content? I have lots of bluebirds. They're content. They always tweet at me when I walk outside. I think they know me, actually. I believe they do anyway. But being content, it's food and clothing. That's all that's essential according to what Jesus is saying. Beyond that, there's a Russian word, but poblashki means that you're so spoiled you don't even know what you have. Beyond that is just that we're spoiled. How many cars you got in your driveway? Don't tell me, I don't want to know. Have you noticed that the context of most of those verses dealt with possessions, though? Things. Why is that? Probably because those are the things that get stuck in our hearts. The possessions, the things of this life. Well, Hebrews talks about this a little bit differently, and he brings together the idea of contentment in godliness and contentment with stuff, okay? So Matthew 13:5. Make sure that your character, your life, is free from the love of money. Now, it doesn't say free from money. It's free from the love. What is that really saying? The idea there is that you give everything to make more money. I have a brother-in-law. I love him. He's a great guy. His name's Todd. All he thinks about is dollar signs every day, all day. And so he's got a full-time job. He makes a lot of good money. But he has like 3 or 4 extra jobs that he's always doing so that he can make more. Now, I'm not going to criticize him in the sense that that's all of his life. He doesn't know Jesus. So what else do you fill it with, folks? What do you fill that vacuum with in your life if Jesus isn't filling it? Stuff, money, right? That's exactly what he's doing. I mean, I love him to death. He's a great guy. He's one of the best brother-in-laws I have. I only have 2. I'm teasing. But you get the point, right? I mean, it's still, are we content? Then he goes on and he says, being content with what you have. Don't let all of our lives be focused on that stuff. But he goes on, and notice he mentioned character, okay? And then he goes on and he says, for he himself has said, I will never leave you, nor will I ever forsake you. Amen. Now, in Clark's commentary on that particular verse, there's 5 negatives. Now, in English, our grammar, if you got 2 negatives, what does that imply? A positive, right? In Greek,